Music producers, audio engineers, or independent artists. If you're watching this video, you've probably felt really good about a mix before, only to take it to the car and realize it sucks. Or maybe you've played it for your friends on your phone, and you're left thinking, well, this isn't as good as it sounded on the studio. So you awkwardly say something like, it's just a demo, but that ends today. I'm sure you know what it's like to feel bogged down with a bunch of contradictory advice when you are just trying to get from okay to really good. Now, the truth is there's so many buttons you can press and so many knobs you can turn, it's easy to get distracted by misinformation or just out of context advice. So this video is really meant to give you value by drawing your attention to common mistakes that can keep you on the wrong side of the hump and things to do to make sure your mixes sound great, whether it's in the car, in the studio, or on your phone. And no, I don't have a course to sell you. All I ask in return is that if you found value in the video, send it to your mom, send it to your cousin, like, subscribe, and tell me what you want to see next. Now you might be thinking, what's the catch? Well, I'm just going to be honest with you guys. You could be using this 10 minutes to watch TikTok. But before you click off yet, I genuinely think you will significantly improve your producing and mixing skills as a result of this video. So to keep it engaging, I'm going to keep the length of explanation relative to how simple the tip actually is. In other words, you won't see me rambling for minutes about something that can be explained in seconds. So it's going to be something like, so especially if you've been sucked into the YouTube rabbit hole, one of the reasons your mixes might not be translating is simply just because you don't have your volume faders right. So I'm going to illustrate that really quick, and then you're going to find out how to start getting that perfect balance every time. So with this track right here, I'm going to show you how it sounds and then how it can kind of get messed up by just boosting a few dB on even a not so prominent instrument. Okay, so this is the track right here we're going to do. Okay. So as you heard, by just putting it up like 5 dB, it really took that glue out and made it so if I were to play that same thing in a car, the first one would sound great and the one with the bad volume balance would sound not so great. So how do you make sure you're getting it just right? Because as you can see, a small difference can go a long way. Basically, the way I like to think of it is always in moves of 0.8 dB. So this is different when you get into something like mastering and, you know, mix bus processing. But for a specific track like this, or this bass, you can really just do 0.8 decibels at a time because it's so easy to get wrapped up in like a 0.1 decibel move or something one way or another. But by just sticking to this motto of only going in increments of 0.8, it makes it so much easier to just get the volume right and move on. Because believe it or not, one of the biggest bottlenecks is actually tweaking something meticulously that isn't super necessary. So check this out. If I just move this instrument up by 0.8 decibels, it's not going to affect the actual sound of the track very much. Okay, so that was actually a full decibel, but it really goes to show 0.8 is that magic number. I promise you guys. You might refine that in the future. Maybe you get down to 0.5, especially when you're mix bus processing. You want to go in like 0.5s, but for just general composition from the get-go, you need to pick a number that's something like 0.8 and just go with it, okay? But beyond just volume balance, like quiet versus loud, you also need good stereo balance. And this is where I see a lot of people mess up. So consider this. Up until the 50s and 60s, most tracks were mixed in mono. So this meant you really couldn't get things to sound wide. Now the magic of stereo is that it actually creates an axis, not just a second speaker. So instead of just adding an extra point like left versus right, it makes it so you can put things anywhere you want within that field. So what this means is you've been given a full axis, and it's important to put things in the middle and the left and right. And you also can't just spread everything out, because if you don't have that contrast between some things in the middle and some in the left and right, it's not going to sound as wide and as great as it would if there's contrast. So to illustrate this, check this out. This is a track mixed normally. And now watch what happens if I bring that entire stereo width all into the center. So I'm going to start with the regular mix and then turn this on. So as you heard, keeping everything in the center really just destroys the entire mix. In contrast, if you widen everything out, it can possibly sound even worse. So check this out. So hardcore audiophiles might be quick to point out this isn't actually the same as putting everything in the center because of phase cancellations and whatnot. But I promise you this is an illustrative example. You're never going to be able to get that good mix by just keeping everything in the center or by widening everything out. And that includes using stereo plugins like this. Use them sparingly, okay? And if you use it on the whole mix, use it carefully. But if just using left, right, and center isn't doing it for you, you need to utilize more of that axis. And let's say try putting a vocal doubler to get that vocal out of the center and a little bit to the sides. What that can do is really put space back in the center for something like drums or bass. Now, even if you get all of that right, the volume and the stereo balance, another reason why your mixes might not be translating is because you're not using the time domain. But before you see that, I got a cool opportunity for you guys that is completely free. So over the next 14 days, I'm going to select one mix that you guys send to this email address. And I'm going to fix your mix in a video coming up shortly and give your current mix a letter grade like B-. I'll put the details in the description, but this should be an exciting opportunity for you guys to see how I would go through things step by step. And all I ask in return is that you like this video if you enjoyed it and comment that you entered your stuff. And if you're interested, I strongly suggest you act fast because honestly, I don't know how long I'm going to keep this going for or if it's going to stay completely free forever. So click the link in the description if you're interested in that and we'll get right back into it. So use delays to make something sound wider and more full, and delays work by spreading out the sound into not only the left and right sides potentially, but also throughout the time of the song. So it can make things sound a lot clearer, especially if they're buried in the background, and make them translate better to a car when you lose a lot of that left-right separation and it kind of just turns into this bundle of greatness. So take a listen to how delays can be used to bring way more life into your mix. So with this track right here,
but you need to get up off your ass today. You say you don't even want to get up. I think you're crazy. By the way.
So take a listen to these guitars. They sound pretty great, but listen to what happens in the mix if I take out some of those delays.
But you need to get up off your ass today. You say you don't even want to get up. I think you're crazy.
So as you heard, it doesn't sound too make or break in solo, but when I took those delays off at the beginning with the whole mix, the guitar almost disappeared, at least the rhythmic breathing sound. So this is what those delays sound like completely on their own. So this is a trick I actually explained in a recent video, but basically by putting one delay in the hard left and one in the hard right and putting them at different times, so I put this one at half the speed of this one, you can create this amazing effect that helps glue your mix and can lead to better translation on actual consumer speakers. And then it just sounds like this amazing, beautiful, luscious guitar. So the next reason why your mixes might not be translating has to do with EQ. And there's actually three main things that people get wrong with EQ. So one of the key things you need to know about mixing with EQ is that moving the 6K, 8K knob up or down can make things sound more upfront and present or push back and less present. So even with something like this bass, I wanted it to sound pretty clear and upfront, and if I take down that 6K knob on an EQ, it's going to sound way less clear, even on a bass. So listen to this. So the next thing with EQ might surprise you, especially if you spent a lot of time learning to mix on YouTube. But when I learned this, it actually changed everything. So when I was starting out, I heard you have to carve this perfect slot of sub bass with the kick and with the bass. And you know, you have to like fine tune everything. But somehow, even when I did this, the bass was either inaudible, completely distorted, or just otherwise terrible sounding when I played it on my car. Why? Because the honest truth about sub bass is that you don't really have to fine tune it. And most of the actual power in the bass comes from 80 to 300 hertz. And then for clarity, something up higher, like I mentioned previously. But the truth is, like 40 to 70, 60, 80 hertz, there's not much you can do to tweak that. And if you just don't have enough sub bass in your raw track, I'll do a video on that in the near future. But one thing I can give you guys today is just add a 40 hertz tone. Now, this might sound completely weird, but this trick has been used in a lot of successful records where somehow the sub bass just isn't there in an instrument. So the producer or the mixer just added a 40 40 hertz tone to kind of fill in that sub. And I know that's not always going to be perfectly in key, and you could mess around with that to try to make it perfect, say 44 hertz, but most of the time you're not going to be able to actually hear that key difference. And I would suggest just trying that 40 hertz strategy. So when you learn that the sub bass doesn't matter as much as you'd think it would, it really changes the game. So take a listen to this and then I'll tell you how I did it. Okay, so right there, you could see that the bass actually occupies the entire spectrum. And the way I got that kick to sit perfectly right at something like 65 hertz, 64, is by just cutting out a little divot within that bass. And that was it. Took 5 minutes. Okay, so now you might be asking, well, how do I get the bass to sound good if it's not in that sub region? Well, if you ever want to know if you're going to be able to hear your bass in real world environments, cut it out at 80 hertz and see how it sounds. So as you heard from that, not only could you hear the bass, you could hear the kick, because a lot of that power in the bass actually comes from the low mid range. And that brings me to the third EQ thing that you need to master if you want your mixes to translate in the real world. And a quick thing I have to throw in there is a reminder to not overly boost your bass in the song. Let the consumer playback system do that. If someone wants to hear sub bass super loud, let them hear that with their subwoofer. Don't just turn all the bass knobs to 10 because that'll eat up a lot of loudness in your track. It is essential to cut out unnecessary sub and some low mid stuff. So for example, this track here, you can see there's really not much going on below those two peaks right there. And before this video, you might have just left it in there. But the truth is, a lot of those things that don't sound super audible or even impactful to the mix can build up. And I'm telling you now, cut out those unnecessary sub and super low mids that you really don't need. Still sounds good. That's what I honed in on for this mix, and that's something to keep in mind. So the next thing you have to know to make your mixes actually translate is when to use a clipper. So this actually relates to the time domain too, and people often don't understand the importance of a clipper because they mix on, good studio monitors. Now this can be great for a lot of things, but not so good for revealing the true impact of particular transients. Firstly, if you don't know what a clipper is, it can be used to tame down the excessive transients. A transient is that initial short, loud part of a sound. For example, the hit of a snare. To cement this in your head, this is similar to the word transitory, which you might have heard from a politician saying something like, inflation is transitory, which, if true, means inflation is bound to go away instead of linger. However, a clipper differs from a limiter in one key way. Instead of just turning down the entire volume of the transient, the clipper basically just cuts off that loud peak that occurs for just a few milliseconds. In turn, this causes a little bit of distortion because it's almost lowering the ceiling of maximum volume and hence clipping. But it happens so fast that our brains don't even register it. Now you can push this effect to the extreme to a point where the distortion becomes obvious, but for our purposes, it's essential to use clippers on drums and perhaps your vocals and bass because it will catch what your compressors don't without reducing the perceived impact of the transient like a limiter would. The reason this is so crucial for translating across all devices, especially in your car, is that even though we don't necessarily register those loud transient peaks, when played back on a car or on other consumer speakers, they can cause distortion that leads to an unpleasant sound. This is because, well, on one hand, your monitors are designed to reveal the full extent of the signal without distorting, but then at the same time, your car speakers will more readily distort from just a few milliseconds of a kick or a snare that's too loud. So with this track here, I'm going to show you what the limiter's doing with and without the clipper. So as you can see, the limiter is really pushing down, especially on those kicks. So I'm gonna put this clipper on the drums, and believe it or not, this is actually only set at a threshold of 0.8. What that means is that clearly my drum signal was actually exceeding 0 for a second. And that's not necessarily bad, but it's just when you put in that limiter, it's gonna make it so you might be limiting too much. Now I add in that soft clipper and watch how much these transients tame down on the limiter. So basically what's gonna happen is that purple amount, which is how much the limiter is reducing, is going to decrease, meaning more of the punch is preserved and those kicks aren't turned down as much. Because remember, what's happening is the clipper is just going to cut those really quick transients off. So as you saw with the soft clipper engaged, that limiter wasn't turning down those kicks as much. Now what's actually interesting is that to my ears, the clipper makes the kicks sound better. Specifically, it makes it sound fatter and punchier because that limiter isn't cutting out that meat of it to deal with some of those transients. So listen to how it sounds with and without the clipper. So not only was using the clipper more conducive to real-world mix translations, it actually made the song sound better. At least in my opinion. Now back to the idea of consumer speakers handling sound differently than your monitors. Try mixing on consumer speakers. Try your AirPods. So when you have a lot more experience, it's usually ideal to mix on monitors, but especially when you're just starting out, it can actually be really helpful to try mixing on AirPods. Now, it might sound super counterintuitive, but think about it. You use your AirPods to listen to music, right? So naturally, you're gonna hone in on what sounds better more easily. And if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work. Just try it out. And in the spirit of just trying things out, if you're ever stuck on something and you're not sure if making a certain move is gonna make the song better or worse, just make a copy of your session and start editing that session. So oftentimes the simple switch of just changing the file can help you let go of attachment you might have to a certain sound. And this can really help with one of the biggest problems I see is people not committing to their choices too much. And with that, it's also possible you forget it's music. You think it's science. So this biggest tip will help you get back into that groove of music, and it actually applies to other aspects of your life because that's something that's been studied by neuroscientists heavily over the past few years. The trick is just go on a walk. Put your session down, go on a walk for 20 minutes, leave your phone at the door. And what's actually going to happen is you're going to get into a state where you're not constantly stimulated. And by going on a walk, your brain is in almost a flow state because there are moving objects around, but there isn't anything that's specifically demanding your attention or sucking it away. Try going on a walk next time you're stuck, whether it's in the mix session or a complex math problem. I'm serious, it'll blow your mind. So last two things that could really hinder the translation of your mix to real world settings is firstly, you're mixing in solo too much and you're staying in what I call micro mode. So what happens when you're mixing in solo is that you really get removed from the context of the mix, and things that sound great on their own can sound awful when you put them back in the mix. And in the same vein, when you're mixing in solo, you can often hone in on problems that actually don't even matter. That's what I call staying in micro mode. Let's say you hone in on a certain frequency and you spend just even hours trying to make that problem go away, when really you put it back in the mix and it's not even there. So to help you tackle this problem of staying in micro mode, I strongly suggest getting one of those hourglass sand timers. Putting it on your desk, let's say it's 5 minutes, and if you really want to hone in on a snare tone, go and turn that thing over and just do it in 5 minutes. If it takes longer, maybe do it 10, but cut yourself off at a certain point because it's easy to get sucked into a void of non-productivity. Lastly, I almost guarantee one of the biggest things preventing good mix translation is that you don't understand compression. Now, I just did a video on this, so I'm not going to go through the super detailed explanation, but in short, you can use different attack speeds and release settings to make certain things sound super far back and others sound much closer. This is truly one of the most crucial aspects of mixing, and if you want to take your compression game up to the next level, I strongly suggest you click on that video. Thank you for watching and have a great day. Quick side note, if you made it to this part of the video, I want you to know you are very much appreciated, and I strongly suggest you check out the Fix Your Mix offer.